Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to India GameChanger. We are joined today by Gadhadar Reddy, the CEO at NoPo NanoTechnologies. Thank you so much for coming to the show. I'm really looking forward to this. Let's give our listeners a little bit of your background for some context, please.
Yeah, sure, Michael. Thanks so much. It's exciting to be on your show. I'm Gadhadar. I'm from Bangalore, India. I grew up here. I had my childhood here, and grew up looking at the stars. Our space agency is based out of here, so I used to meet a lot of astronomers, and that's something that
Awesome.
fascinated me as a kid and has continued now. And all of my work has been around making this happen.
I love it. I love it. This is the main, kind of big topic. What actually is a single-walled carbon nanotube, right? And then also, why do they matter?
Sure. I'll tell you why they matter to me personally.
Okay.
As I'm from Bangalore, I grew up here. Space was always fascinating, and when I went to a summer school, saw the stars, I just fell in love. I was like, wow, this is it. This is something I want to be doing. This is where I want to go. Then I looked around, and then I saw, okay, space is hard. And the more astronomers I spoke to, more people from the space sector, the more difficult it started getting. And then one challenge that everybody spoke about was that the reason every one of us cannot go to space, there have been only 460 humans that have gone to space in the last 70 years. And
Wow.
why can't, and out of 7 billion that are there now, which is ridiculous. So then what's the reason? And it always came down to it's hard. Rocket science is hard. We're pushing everything to its limits and we're just extracting the last few grams of performance. The only way we could have everyone go to space is if we could have something incredibly strong. And nanotubes happen to be such a material. They're the strongest known material. Their strengths are about 100 times that of steel. So that's the reason I was fascinated by them and looked at ways to create them.
Got it. Can I ask you this, though, too? And we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. I'm fascinated by science, right? Because in a way, like music, mathematics, obviously related heavily to science, all of these things to me just seem to exist in nature, right? So, and they're discovered by humans and they've been there forever. So, even the greatest, to me, like the greatest songs, the greatest science, it's all been out there. It's just waiting for someone like you or someone like Mozart to kind of put it all together and just say, here's how we should look at it. So, do these things like single walled carbon nanotubes, do structures like that exist in nature as well?
Sure, that's a very interesting question. I'll actually tell you a small story about their discovery
Please.
and also about
Yeah.
how I found their existence in nature. So the first time, so around 80s, humans assumed that every form of carbon is known. And even in my school, while I was studying late in the 90s, it was like there's 7 forms of carbon. That's it. There's nothing else to do about it. And then,
I love it. I love it. Don't even think about it. Don't go
yeah.
there.
And then in the mid 80s, one Professor Croto, he'd been observing starlight and he came across a spectra of starlight that did not make any sense. It looked like it was from carbon, but did not match any known form of carbon. And he was bewildered, like, what is this? Like, doesn't make any sense. And there's something coming from
Right.
starlight that looks like this, and it seems to have some traces of iron in it. And he happened to meet a person called Smalley, Dr. Richard Smalley at Rice University. Dr. Smalley happened to have the world's most powerful laser. And like any little boy with a powerful weapon, he was just firing it at everything he could find. And Krotos said, okay, you know what? Let's put some iron and let's put some carbon and fire it and see what happens from it. They did that and they found the same spectra. And they were
Wow.
surprised. Okay, there's something forming here and that looks exactly the same. Now let's put this under a microscope. And as they do that, they observe that these are football like structures. These are the fullerenes. So this sector started off from there, that suddenly there was a new form of carbon where we've used carbon for thousands of years and we did not know there was another form of carbon sitting right there. That was the
I love it.
initial discovery.
Yep.
So while I was reading, so one of my hobbies is to read books, and I usually like while in the library, I just go randomly, just start picking up whatever book I can find. One time, I picked a geology book that landed in my lap, so just started reading. I can't stop reading if there's a book in front of me.
Right.
And there, I found that one of the evidence for a mass extinction event on Earth is a thin layer of fullerenes around the planet. And fullerenes and nanotubes belong to the same family. Like when you stretch that football, that becomes a single wall nanotube, a single atom thick tube. So, one of the mass extinction events that wiped out 90% of life on Earth, and the evidence for it are nanotubes and fullerenes, a few micron layer all across the planet. That's our natural existence. And every time you burn anything, the ash contains fullerenes and nanotubes in small quantities.
So how did we not notice that before? Like if every time you burn something, the ashes have these these um these structures. How did we not know that before?
So it's mostly these were so okay. That's a very interesting question. In fact, when we start deep diving into nanotube history, we start finding that the Russians had started reporting nanotube-like structures back in the 60s as soon as the electron microscopes were available. It's just that the quantities are tiny. You don't get them in large enough chunks in one place to tell them, okay, this is a new material, this is what it's doing, and all that. It's like you spot something, and okay, there's something there. So the Russians did observe it, and there's always disputes that they did not publish it first, and the Japanese and the Americans published it first, so they should get the credit. So that's always there. But as soon as the microscopes were discovered and we could resolve things, people did find them.
So this is also you segued perfectly into what I wanted to ask you next. A lot of scientific discovery, at least in my mind, I'm not a scientist and I'm not nearly at your intellectual level, right? So I'm probably going to say something wrong. But it seems to me that a lot of scientific discovery discovers things like this and says, there just aren't that many of them, or it's unstable. And then all the work around it says, we can make this useful, but only if we can make it in bigger quantities, cheaper, or make it stable, right? And then you have to manufacture it. I don't think we're like digging these nanotubes out of the ground and then using them for microchips. We have to figure out how to make them and make them stable. What happened there? Like, how did that happen? So we figured out how to make more of them once we discovered that they were useful. How did that happen?
Sure. So soon after their discovery, people started realizing that there were some interesting aspects of nanotubes that were just like someone writing out of science fiction. And in fact, Arthur Clarke had written about these kinds of structures, but he called them diamond fibers. And he has a nice book called Fountains of Paradise, in which he describes how they build a space elevator using diamond-like fibers, and nanotubes fit perfectly. They had the same properties that he describes because they're also carbon.
Oh,
So
right.
people had known that with sp2 bonds you get very high strength, and as soon as they've discovered, people tested their strength, it was like, okay, wow, it's off the charts. And then you have its thermal properties that are very good, like it's the highest thermal conductive material we know, or it can be the lowest, it can be a very low thermal conductive material depending on the direction. And you have its electronic properties that were discovered. These were all happening in like quick succession right after the tubes were found. Now, as people looked at scaling them, there were quite a few challenges. Now, this is one of the areas that I worked on. So the main challenge
Yep.
was what people realized is like you could take a single tube, you get amazing properties. Now try putting them together in a big bundle and you don't get those properties. Now what happened? And what
Yeah.
happens when you
Why?
produce tubes again and again? Like how do you ensure that they're all of the same dimension? So the challenge
Yeah.
here is you're talking of producing tubes. The manufacturing process are basically breaking down atoms and reassembling those atoms and being aware of how you're reassembling those atoms.
I
And
love it.
when you do that at the atomic level, things are harder to control. So your diameter start changing. So an interesting aspect, like as an example, is with the nanotubes, we get the diameters we're talking about are 10 atoms. So you're talking of a structure that's just 10 atoms in diameter. And if you were to change the diameter by half an atom, its properties are completely different. So you either get something that's semiconducting or something that's completely conducting electrons, and just by this
Right.
small change in atoms. And now you're looking at manufacturing those. And this is where people had major challenges. Like, how do you produce all tubes of the exact same kind, produce like trillions of them? And this is the work that we are doing now that we have solved and are helping move things further.
So you talked about having this atomic structure, right, and then reassembling them in a way to make these carbon nanotubes, which is just again, it's like it's so fascinating to me. Is there a quantum physics aspect to this? Do you know what I mean? So that even
Yep.
just interacting with them may change the way that they behave. Does that make sense? Is that a fair question?
It is. So it does, and this was the romantic angle that brought me towards this field. So while
I love
studying
it.
astronomy and the stars, so we were looking at explaining like why is our sun stable? Like what's holding it together? Like why isn't
Yeah.
it just crushing inside? And the fascinating thing is that it's the atomic reactions inside the sun that are creating a radiation pressure. Like as we try to compress the atoms together, they're in turn producing a radiation pressure, which is then holding up against gravity and keeping the sun stable. And there was a question that was asked in class. They were like, okay, so how long does a photon take from the center of the sun to reach Earth? And I shouted out, okay, so it's a general knowledge question. It's 8 minutes. That's what we've been taught all along. And the professor was like, no, you're wrong. It's not 8 minutes. It's 8 minutes from the surface of the sun. But to get to from the center of the sun to the surface of the sun, it takes a few million years. Because the photon has to move in a high pressure, high density volume, and it has to move randomly using random steps to get to the surface. So a photon from the center of the sun to surface is 2 to 3 million years, and then 8 minutes to come to Earth. So I was like,
Wow.
wow, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
It was like, this is mind blowing. Like, I did not think that these tiny little atoms that we don't think can do much are doing so much. And that was my fascination with it, just wanting to study more about them. So, here, what happens in the production of the nanotubes, now the field of tech is called nanotechnology. And the
Yep.
nanotech is all driven by quantum mechanical aspects about
Okay.
the materials. So what we're doing here is we take carbon monoxide. That's a precursor that we use here. I like carbon monoxide because it can be produced from carbon dioxide, which is plentiful on Mars. So one day, if we go there, we can still make nanotubes and come back to Earth in a safe way.
just in case we
That
need,
was
just in case we need a few extra nanotubes, we can make them from Mars and bring them back. Okay,
yeah,
great.
yeah, to put it together as a spacecraft, so it will be more stable because nanotubes are perfect for space. Anyway,
Wow.
so the carbon monoxide is broken down, so it requires higher temperatures to break it down into single atoms of carbon. So in our process, we inject iron particles. So these iron particles are clusters of atoms, and these are very precise. Like these are like sub 100 atoms of iron particles, which are functioning as catalysts that break down these carbon atoms. So you have a high temperature gas of carbon, you have these precise particles of iron being injected, which are breaking down the carbon, and these carbon atoms are then being assembled into a tubular form. So the conditions we maintain and the way we mix these gases allow us to form these tubular structures. That's what happens inside these systems. So it's super complicated, like because you have very split second decisions that have to be made, and everything has to happen again and again for long duration. So
So,
yeah,
can I ask you this? Do the nanotubes, and this is a dumb question, but I have to ask because I really just want to know: do these nanostructures get created in a lab, or is it a factory, or some kind of combination of a lab factory kind of thing? Do you know what I mean?
sure, yep. So at NoPo, we are in the transition from a lab to a factory that's happening right now as we speak. So
Okay.
initially, it started off by just putting the reactor in a garage, getting it running, figuring out a few things from there, then moving to a more controlled
The
facility.
garage.
Yep. Yeah. So the way I started off with things was so it's more like if you tell me if you promise that you're going to do something, I'm going to hold you accountable for that and come back to you for it. So in India,
Yikes.
like as you know, we still live as a community, and all the uncles and family and everyone being close together.
Yep.
So when I was going for my studies to the US, we had like a family gathering, and one of the uncles said, "Hey, if you want to do something about nanotubes or nanotech, I'm happy to help you out." So I came back after my
Super
studies
cool.
and told him, like, see, you have given me a rain check. Now you don't have a choice. I'm going to
Right?
start my
You said you would
company.
do it. I'm gonna
Yep.
go do it. Do you have a
Yep.
garage?
Yep. And I told him, like, he has some empty space in front of his office. I'm going to put up my reactors there. And he's like, okay, you know what? There's an empty space. You go there. It's fine. So we built a small garage and did it there.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's so great. So you're moving into a factory now.
Yeah. We built a space. We've moved here. We are now adding more reactors as we speak. And we've got more professionals from the automotive industry and the biotech industry. So because this field is an accumulation of all the sectors, so getting
Yeah.
expertise from everywhere and building out things right now.
So you've raised some money as well, yes?
Yes, that's right.
Have you raised enough? Because it sounds like this is very complicated stuff.
That's true. So the approach I took was you're absolutely right. In fact, I've been at this for the last 14 years. And when
Wow.
yeah. So when I started off with things, the first thing I did was to look up everybody who has tried to make nanotubes. And the most stuff I could find about them was their bankruptcy filings. So I went through that to see what happened when
This is
people
such a great
tried.
story.
Yeah. So
Go
then,
ahead. So it's such a great story.
yeah. So one of my understandings from that was they were not able to spend much in terms of developing the technology. They were ending up spending a lot on OPEX rather than on CAPEX, which is what you need to actually build these kinds of things. So I
Yeah.
took a very different approach. I decided, okay, fine, you know what, 10 years, I'm going to put my life on this. I don't really care about the salaries. whatever is
Yep.
needed, we'll do that. And that's how we'll go about this. So I worked with very small teams, and I just wrote to anybody I could find, and any professor who had written something about it, I would reach out to them, and they were happy to help out, and it was amazing. There was a
For
professor from
sure.
Portland called Stedman. There was a German professor who helped me out with some of the catalyst particles I was trying to build. I got some incredible support for doing this. And from the family, I raised a very small amount. I raised about $150,000. That was my first raise, and I did not raise anything for the
Mm.
next 13 years. And
Wow.
I took a very frugal approach. Got a lot of support from my parents and my brother, who he was effectively like taking his salary and pumping it into the company for me to help do the things. So we took an effort where it was focused on, okay, so this is the problem. Now, how do I solve this? And at times in the early stage, one of my understanding is to develop a new technology. You have to go through the loops of figuring out how to make it repeatable. Until it's repeatable and then you have a few customers, there's no point in raising money
Yeah.
for it. It's just going to take
Exactly.
a long time. So that's the
Yep.
reason to look at that. We took that approach. Later, we also got a few grants from the government that helped us in midway in developing more products. And later, once we had the customers and the product ready, then we raised funding. So that became a good place to be in. We raised 3 million this year with Axelor and
I saw that.
Inflexer a part of the round.
Yep. Well,
So
Inflexor
yeah,
is also a very well-known venture capitalist. I've actually had them on the show. So
nice.
congratulations to you.
Thank
That's great.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great team, great
amazing.
people.
Yep.
Can we talk about this a little bit? The Indian government is supporting and very supportive and encouraging in the space sector. So they should be super encouraged by the stuff that you're building. Is anybody else in India building this stuff and patenting it like you are?
So when it comes to the nanotubes, I haven't really seen much activity within India.
It's so hard to do. But
It
anyway, go
is.
ahead.
Yep. And there have been quite a few nanotech startups that have popped up. People are patenting stuff, more other materials. So I've just stuck to this one material because like one of the things that I've seen over time is like it's all about the current like fad. Like for example, like today it's boron nitride nanotubes. So you go work on boron
Right.
nitride nanotubes, you get more papers from it, and people are happy with that. So for me, it was about how do we take this material and how do we create a spacecraft out of it and how do we go all the way to the end. So I've just stuck to that and
Uh,
pursued it.
clearly, I just love this idea. You're like, it's not the thing is these carbon nanotubes, you say like we haven't focused on any other materials. It's not like having like a different color Rubik's cube. Do you know what I mean? It's so hard to make this thing anyway. Like, why would you branch out to like other materials? But anyway,
Sure.
I don't even know where to start with this. But like, what do you besides building spacecraft? What else is it good for? And maybe you can explain like scientifically why. I know you touched on this a little bit, but like, will we be building quantum computers out of this, right? Because you did talk about the quantum mechanics and quantum physics part of this. Other kinds of microchips, like what kind of electronics and why is it so good at all this stuff?
Yeah, Michael, that's a great question. So, in fact, so one of the first things I did after we stabilized production of the nanotubes was look at where we could use it. We listed 120 different areas. I'll talk to you about a few of them, and these are all areas where it
Please
just completely changes the field. So
tell
one
me.
area, like I'll start with a major problem today. Water is a major problem in the world,
Water.
yeah, and nanotubes. So they have a very unique structure at a specific diameter. So what's happened is today we have all these reverse osmosis membranes which we use to filter out water. They consume a lot of energy. So what our bodies have done over the billions of years of our evolution is they created a very specific structure called an aquapore. So these are tiny structures through which our cells in our bodies can take up water molecules without friction. So they get a complete pass through of water molecules. Now this structure is incredible. It has a performance that's at least 10 to 100 times that of a normal RO membrane. But these aquapores are difficult to separate from these biological membranes. And there is, in fact, a company that's doing exactly that. They produce membranes with a high performance, but they are expensive. With nanotubes, it turns out that these are the synthetic analogs of aquapores. So
Oh
at
my
the
God.
right diameter, you can put them in a membrane and you get high performance. And by high performance, you're looking at numbers that are orders of magnitude better. And it's in a field where performance increments have been very small. Now, today at NoPo, we have made membranes that are twice as big in terms of flux and rejection of water. So basically, they have more water, they have twice the amount of water flowing through for the same size membrane. And we are doing that as part of a program for the government. and we have achieved that, and there's a lot of room for development there.
So, can I ask you this question? And
Hmm.
I may get this terminology wrong as well, but there are operations that we do, right? Where we put stents inside people's oh, come on, tell me what
The
the name for it is.
heart,
Their
the
veins,
aorta.
right? So
Yep,
in the
yep,
heart.
yep.
Can you use these single-walled carbon micro nanotubes for the stents as well? Because they're so strong, they let water go through. And if you put them in the right shape, are there medical uses for this as well that would like
Yes,
change the game?
you're right on target. They are, and in fact, another very interesting use. They have been evaluated as materials that could go in there. They've also been evaluated as materials for dialysis because these tubes you can vary the size and it can have specific molecules flow through, so you don't extract everything and you just have specific mineral extractions going from them. There's also
Right.
been a scenario like this exact same kind of structure that you mentioned. There are publications for that, that these tubes are rolled into structures that hold up the veins and arteries. There's also research articles about carbon nanotubes being created as films that are placed on the heart to better enable electrical impulses to pass through. So the nice thing
Wow.
about them is it's carbon, so it's biocompatible. So in the future, whenever you have any interconnects to the human body with an external computer, it's going to be made of carbon nanotubes.
But
So,
how about making legs and arms and stuff like that so that you can create really strong
yep,
appendages for people, like if their arm gets cut off or something like that?
yep. So those are in the work. They're more early stage right now. So one of the challenges there has been. So you're absolutely right. Titanium has a higher density. Carbon nanotubes have more or less the same density as bone. So you wouldn't have additional problems that we get from these artificial titanium-based structures that we put in our bodies, and they're biocompatible.
Yep.
So we did look at that as a potential application. So for that, what we're doing is finding ways on how do we connect the nanotubes together. How do we interlock them so we get the exact same strength on a larger structure? That's an ongoing work. So the precursor for that had been how do we produce more of these tubes so we could play with them for all these other applications. So that's ongoing. And another medical application is also cancer treatments. That's another major area.
Tell me.
So these nanotubes, they're so tiny that they can actually pass through any structure and they can start accumulating. So basically, cancer cells are just eating, eating, eating all the time. So they're just going to accumulate the nanotubes. And nanotubes are great at infrared absorption. So what's interesting about infrared is our skin is transparent to infrared. So the moment you have the cancer cells being absorbed and you put an infrared gun on top of it, it kills all the cancer cells selectively because they have eaten more of the nanotubes. You're heating them up, and the temperature is sufficient to kill them off. So that's an ongoing work, and people have
Wow.
used them as markers. It's amazing that yeah, you have all these, and you can add markers to them, so it can help them pass through barriers and get molecules into the reaction areas.
So, I mean, we've just gone through health a little bit. So, there were some other things that you wanted to mention, right? I interrupted you. What are some of the other uses that you've seen or that you wanted to talk about?
Sure. So there's also so my favorite use case, of course, is about making the fibers from them that are strong, that are extremely strong. That's an ongoing work too. So what people
Right.
have done is, like one professor, Ray Bogman at University of Texas. So he's taken nanotubes produced from a reactor that he has, and he's made artificial muscles. And these artificial muscles work like human muscles, but they're much stronger. So that
What, what,
translates.
what is that? What's a muzzle? What do you mean?
Yeah. So the way we are able to, like, say, I'm able to move my hands. The way this is happening is
Oh,
that my
muscles.
muscle.
Got it. Got it. Got
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
I understand. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we're able to make artificial muscles. And so that's another major breakthrough because now suddenly when you have an exoskeleton, you have motors, and these motors draw humongous amounts of energy. That's the reason we don't have them running around all the time. But our
Yep.
bodies have built out amazing structures like this. Now, the nanotube muscles would one day enable these kinds of movements that you're able to like lift far heavier loads with using far less energy. That's all on the physical side. Now, on the electronics, you have nanotubes functioning as something called direct band gap semiconductors. Now, what these allow us to do is to shrink, imagine today's electronics at the smallest node. That's today we are 3 nanometers with Apple's newer
Yep.
devices. Imagine
Yep.
shrinking them by further 50 times.
Yeah. So
That's what
less than a nanometer, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So and also what's interesting is when we talk of a 3 nanometer device, the transistor inside it is still 40 nanometers by 40 nanometers. And a nanotube device is 1 nanometer by 10 nanometers.
Okay. So I have a it's not controversial, but I have an interesting question for you, just to interrupt this a little bit. There seem to be so many uses for this, and I think it was in like 1991, 1992. I can't remember. I was sitting at my desk in Morgan Stanley in Tokyo, and I was reading an article in a newspaper, like in a physical newspaper. I think it was a copy of the New York Times. It may have been the Wall Street Journal. And like on one of the middle pages, it just said scientists have now figured out a way to replicate the functionality of the human eye. And I just kept reading the article over and over again and just thinking, okay, it can act like the human eye, which means it has to be able to connect to like a brain like thing. It feels to me like we're getting really close to like understanding, like if we can take these single-walled carbon nanotubes and make synthetic muscles out of them, are we getting to a point now where we're going to be able to like literally like recreate humans? It sounds like a dumb question, but because we're understanding how all these little things work. Do you know what I mean? Like we talked about this before we started recording. All of this stuff has kind of been available since the Earth is here, right? I mean, nothing's changed. There's no new substances here. It's just we're figuring out and discovering. Is it kind of like, is there a philosophical aspect to this when you're building these things? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So there is. It's a very loaded question, so needs some
Yeah, but I don't
time to
mean that in
process
a
that.
bad
Yeah.
way.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about it philosophically. So I'm asking you, like, join me in this little philosophical discussion because I'm thinking about it that way. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So there are, I can think of two things, especially when you mentioned philosophy. One was the motivation for even pursuing nanotubes. Now, yes, space was motivation enough, and precursor to those, that was actually discussions with my grandpa, one of my grandpa and his brothers, and
Yep.
about the meaning of life. And I was
Yeah.
in the fourth grade while talking to him about these things, so I got a
I
good
got
head
it.
start. So basically, his viewpoint was everything in the universe is is fixed. It's like we have a concept in India called Maya, that everything that you see is an illusion and is not reality. And in the Maya
Right.
predefines what happens. So you don't really have free will. That was his contention. So, but I
I
believe
understand.
that we have the free will in terms of determining what the outcome is. And how do you
I agree.
prove that you have such a thing? So that was the question that I started off my journey with. And for me, books have been very influential. And even now, I have the saying that whatever problem, there's a book for it. So I keep going for that. And so I ended up with an interesting book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And it was quite influential. It was basically a collection of anecdotes of people who had tried to do something big. And what I
Hmm.
ended up finding there was if you set an end goal and you're pursuing the end goal, and even if it's impossible, it's more fun and you'll get more things to come together and you can make something happen. And that's the exciting part of a journey. So that was my philosophical journey. Now, in terms of the nanotube journey over the years, when I look back at it, so
Right.
I was part of something called Singularity University with Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis. And
Yep.
Ray has been talking of the concept of human singularity, where computers get better than us. And in such a scenario, it's going to be our machines are going to get better than us. Like just like GPT keeps getting better every few months, our computers are going
Right.
to keep doing that, and they will surpass human intelligence. And we will at some point need to incorporate that into our own selves and start utilizing it. And these provide pathways for doing that. These computers become part of us as we grow into
Yeah.
them.
So there's a clear, and we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about this. It's just something I've been thinking about with the war in Ukraine and the war in Israel and all this other stuff that's going on in the world. It has always been the case that like the hardest fighting armies with the best weapons are the ones that are going to win wars. And God, I wish we'd stop fighting with each other, but it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen. But what these types of inventions mean, and again, I've been thinking about this for years now, is that what's going to end up happening is that the countries that are best at like video games are going to win the wars, right? Because they're going to actually have robot soldiers that are built with single-walled carbon nanotubes and other materials like this that they just like reproduce constantly until the other side gives up. And again, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I'm just saying, like, you're right. There's so much stuff that can be built with this. We just have to decide like what the right way is to do. And you're right. You'll learn so much along the way by building this stuff. And I agree with your grandfather.
Mm,
in one sense. I don't think things are fixed, but I do think that everything that we need is already in the universe. We talked about this before, that we just have to find it. And I love the fact that you found this. Can you
mm.
talk about like one more? Can you talk about one more usage of this? Maybe like energy storage or batteries or whatever the one is you want to talk about.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So batteries are another major area for nanotubes. So they go into anodes of batteries. So basically, what's happening is battery densities keep going up. That's how the prices keep falling. So nanotubes are going to batteries along with silicon particles. And what they do is
Right.
stabilize the silicon particles and the ability to hold more lithium ions. So this gives a battery with a higher capacity. And we're talking of 3 to 4 times the capacities. And these materials have already started making it into batteries. So today's anything that you buy today is actually having nanotubes inside them. And any new battery manufacturing technique makes use of these nanotubes. And also another interesting one is also quantum computers. You mentioned about them. So
Yeah.
in fact, I came across a company that's raised funding where they're having the qubits stabilized inside of a nanotube. So what they found is that inside of the nanotube, they do not decohere so easily, so they stay stable for a much longer duration. So you can have
Right.
thousands of nanotubes with thousands of qubits all running parallelly. And today, it's getting
I
10
love it.
qubits is hard, and then suddenly you're looking at thousands of computers, so you can get get away with the solutions getting more accurate.
I love it. Is there some? I feel like we could just talk about this forever because there's so many use cases and it's all so exciting. And the one of the things that I love is talking to an entrepreneur who's super happy about the stuff he's building. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like you seem really happy about this. Is there some joy inside of you from an India perspective, right? Building not just in India for India, but building in India for the rest of the world. Do you know what I mean?
Yep, yep. So I do. Michael, and in fact, when I went for a visa interview for the visa officer, I told them I'm going to come back to India and make a company that makes nanotubes, and I'm doing exactly that. So what I believe personally is, for me, the system in India and the government has actually been quite helpful in the sense that
Awesome.
I won fellowships in the government from the government when I was in my school, won a lot of contests, and then when I got to my engineering, that was again a subsidized program. So basically, my entire engineering was like $200 for 4 years of schooling.
Which let me be clear that that's the way it should be for everybody, but that's just my political opinion. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm super happy for that. Go ahead.
yeah. And that was and I've always held that gratitude that the system
Yep.
and the people here have been super helpful for me, and I have to give back to the society, and it's important that I do that. And this is
Yeah.
my way of doing it, and I feel that at some point India needs newer technologies. We do need to be ahead of the curve, because oftentimes when I speak to certain people, they think India is like a dump yard, that's a dumping ground for old technologies. I have
No,
something that's 20 years old, put it here, it sells because it's cheaper. And I believe that we can actually be at the forefront. We have some incredible minds in here, and we can do a
I
lot
know
of
you.
cool
I know
stuff.
you
So
can. Sorry.
that's,
I know you
yeah.
can. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yep. So that's exactly what I'm doing, and setting and documenting every step so that whoever wants to build it, I'm happy to share that with them so they can go build amazing stuff here.
That was the other thing I want to ask you, and then maybe I'll let you go because I feel like we could keep talking about this, but I want to leave some stuff on the table because I want to have you back if you don't mind.
Mhm.
Like in a year, and I mean that seriously because this stuff is going to change, and you're going to be further down the line, and the manufacturing is going to be about all this kind of stuff, and I do want to learn more about it there. But how do you look at collaborations, right? How do you get people to take the stuff that you're doing and then build things with it as well?
Yep. So it depends on from people to people. So basically, what we have found is when it comes to nanotubes, people reach out to us because the expertise we have built over the years. So when you look
Yep.
for single-wall nanotubes, there's just a handful of players around the planet, and being from India gives another advantage, which is amazing, and especially
Yeah,
the
yeah.
last few years. And we're quite open to collaboration. We treat everyone with a lot of respect, give a complete hearing and understanding of what they're trying to build, see how best we can help them. And over the years, what I've also done is to put together a prototyping facility in here. So anything you can think of you want to do with nanotubes, you can actually build it. Like you can do it within 24 hours. So we have made sure that's in place. So every chemical required to modify them, everything required to play with them is here. So that's something we always open up. And it ultimately, what I've seen is for something to be successful, you have to be at it for a long duration. and that's
Yeah,
at
for sure.
least a 10-year journey, and that patience is a little lacking, and whoever has the patience, we are happy to work with them and
Yeah,
to help
yeah.
them build
Look,
things.
I said this to you on the prep call, right? Like, to be good at something, a lot of people can be good at something, but to be great at something, you have to care about it. You clearly care about this, and that's why you've dedicated, what did you say, 14 years of your life to making this thing work. It's kind of amazing. I'm hoping, in a way, I'm desperately hoping that your grandfather, who spoke to you when
Mm.
you were in fourth grade, has been able to see some of this success. That's
Mm.
all I'm going to say. You don't have to respond, but I really hope
Sure.
so. Um, This is really incredible stuff. I'm going to thank you, Gadhadar Reddy, the CEO at NoPo NanoTechnologies. This has been amazing. Please do come back. I'd love to
Sure.
have you back. This was insanely great.
Awesome, Michael. Thank you. Appreciate that.